Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Just giving folks a few minutes to join us. We're really excited to have you this afternoon as we kind of get together to reflect on how CoOp celebrated Pride Month this year. And we're especially thrilled to have Juan Fernandez with us this afternoon to moderate this town hall discussion. And so we encourage you to share your thoughts throughout the conversation. This is a Zoom meeting, not a webinar, so definitely turn your camera on if you feel comfortable. You're welcome to unmute yourself. You can just use the little raise hand feature when you'd like to hop in and be part of the conversation. And so we're looking forward to hearing from you this afternoon and having a really good and robust conversation. With that said, it's my pleasure to introduce Juan for those of you who don't know him already. He is the president and CEO of the Credit Union Association of New Mexico, and he's also a member of NCBA CLUSA's board of directors. Welcome, Juan. And joining Juan this afternoon to help moderate our discussion is Tamila Blaylock, NCBA CLUSA's Vice President of Cooperative Relations. Juan and Tamila, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Tamila, go ahead.
Yes, I just want to say thank you, Liz, for the introduction. Thank you, Juan, so much for joining us. I also wanted to say thank you all for joining us today. And we're also appreciative of having all of you join us and also for all of our supporters on the board, in addition to CUNA Mutual, who has just been a really great partner this year in supporting all that we're doing to amplify pride within the cooperative movement. So thank you to CUNA Mutual. If you have not had the opportunity to check out our Prelude to Pride webinar, which we had at the end of May, that's on our YouTube page. And thank you much, Juan, for serving as our moderator for today. So the floor is yours to engage in this amazing conversation.
Great. Well, good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Happy Pride. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so glad that NCBA CLUSA invited me and asked me to moderate this conversation. And like Liz and Tamila said, this is going to be a conversation. It's not a one-way communication. So as Elizabeth said, I'm Juan Fernandez with the Credit Union Association of New Mexico. I also serve on the board of NCBA CLUSA, and previously I also served on the board of directors of our local food co-op here in New Mexico, La Montanita Food Co-op. By the way, I'd love to invite all of you to drop in your name, your titles, what co-op or credit union you're from, and what city and state you're from. It would be great to see where all of you are joining us from. And I'm really excited for this conversation. Tamila mentioned that CUNA Mutual Group is sponsoring this. Once again, thank you for doing that. Earlier this year, we launched in New Mexico CU Shine, which is a statewide employee resource group for the queer community in our state for the credit union employees. And it was a great success. CUNA Mutual was also at the center of that and was a key sponsor of that event. So thank you for your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and especially thank you for your commitment to the queer community and helping us celebrate Pride Month. So with that, I'd love to, Meeisha, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Juan. Again, welcome everyone. My name is Meeisha Hedden. I am currently working with NCBA CLUSA as one of their staff support persons for the membership team with Tamila Blaylock. So glad to be joining you all with having several years of experience working in association space and now transitioning to work in the cooperative community. So glad to be a part of the team and to engage. And so if you are interested in getting more involved with NCBA CLUSA in a different way, we encourage you to keep a lookout for some opportunities to engage in volunteering opportunities, as well as to connect through CoOp Circle, which is, again, another platform for you all to connect and introduce and meet and share research and knowledge with some of your cooperative peers. Thanks, Juan.
Wonderful. And Tamila, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and also what you do at NCBA CLUSA?
Hello, Tamila Blaylock. The title is Vice President of Cooperative Relations, and my responsibility is to connect our membership and stakeholder community. So to grow our membership and also make sure that our members are engaged and are connecting with each other, and also bringing that to the stakeholder community, which are stakeholders, affectionate term for those who are not yet members or who are partnering with NCBA CLUSA. So we want to hear from everyone in the cooperative movement from all sectors. And that's also independent of your membership status in NCBA CLUSA. Of course, we love to have all of you as members. More importantly, we want to make sure that we are engaging, supporting, the cooperative movement, from the startups to those thinking about startups to very long-term operating cooperatives. From the board level to the staff level, we're here to support you there. I am out of Washington, D.C. area. I'm in my home in Alexandria, Virginia.
Beautiful, thank you. So as we are ending, we're wrapping up Pride Month. We're June 29th as we are recording this and having this conversation. As we reflect back on the 2022 Pride Month, I'd love to invite all of you to share with us how you celebrated Pride Month at your cooperative, at your credit union, and how that might have been different from years past. Anyone want to, Andrew, I know you, I saw the pictures. You want to share how you celebrated Pride?
Yeah, Juan, thanks so much. It's great to be here, and really look forward to hearing some examples from across the cooperative movements. But yeah, so I'm with the Vantage West Credit Union. So we're a financial cooperative in central and southern Arizona. And yeah, our approach to Pride, I'll admit we've only been doing this now for a couple of years. I've been working with a couple of my colleagues to really advocate for the credit union to even beyond the LGBTQ community, look at ourselves as much as a social institution as we do a financial institution, and that we have a higher role to play in really advancing the social causes in our community. One of the things that we tried for the first time this year is a really strong social presence. We asked some of our team members who are part of one of our employee resource groups called Pride, to share their story about what Pride Month meant to them, and share a shot of them kind of living in the community, and featured some of our team members on social media throughout the 4 weeks of Pride Month, and had some really great engagement with our members, with members of the community, and it was just so refreshing to see so many team members eager and comfortable to stand up and share their story. And it really highlighted for us as a credit union our values of supporting members from all walks of life, and particularly for Pride Month, those employees that identify as LGBTQ. Beyond that, we're looking forward to being a part of the Pride Parade here in Southern Arizona for the first time. If you know Arizona, this is kind of a hot time of year, so we're a little odd that we don't do our Pride festivals until the September-October timeframe, but we're looking forward to being a part of the parade and the festival for the first time ever here at Vantage West. So we're just getting our start, but we've got a great groundswell of eagerness and excitement to kind of build on these first couple of years and go even further.
Exciting. And speaking of Pride parades, as I mentioned earlier, that we launched CU Shine this year for the first time. And one thing that really got me really excited is that here in Albuquerque, for the first time, instead of each credit union having their own float or their own booth at Pride, they all marched together under the CU Shine banner. They all had their own credit union's logo where they were giving out their swag, but they all did it cooperatively, which I think was so awesome and such great testament of the cooperative nature of our movement. So by the way, I didn't mention this earlier. If you'd like to contribute, feel free to raise your hand or type in your question, but we'd love to hear from all of you about how your cooperative celebrated Pride Month this year. Not all at once. Come on. I know there were some exciting things happening throughout the country. Lindsay, I know you just posted that you're from a food cooperative, Hanover, I believe. Did you guys do anything special for Pride Month at your cooperative?
We didn't do a ton extra this year, as we just formed a DEI group, and we've just had a lot of change in leadership. So we're still filling out some new things. So we do have an employee group. And we were able to put out some messages and start to at least do a diversity calendar. And so I highlighted days throughout the month and just sent people information. So yesterday I had a large email about the importance of just the Stonewall riots, the importance of Pride, why we recognize this. So we're really just starting to lay the groundwork. And hopefully we'll be able to do a lot more in the future, but we're still fairly new. So to do
Great.
work, we're an old co-op.
Great. You know, and I'll share a personal experience that happened at our CU Shine event, because I think it really highlights why it's important to celebrate as a community. So I knew that one of the people that was going to be potentially attending CU Shine was someone that was going through was transitioning. What I did not know was that her employees had never met her. So the CU Shine event was actually the first time that any of the employees, anyone pretty much, actually got to meet her. So to me, that was so amazing, because to hear how excited she was to be there and to not only be accepted, but celebrated by her coworkers, made that event so worth it. And it was wonderful to let everyone know, whether they were part of the community or they were allies, that they were cherished, they were seen, and they belonged in our cooperative movement. So that to me was really, really awesome. So before we move on, did anyone else want to share something awesome that they were really excited about that their cooperative or they saw another cooperative doing during Pride Month? By the way, Salandi, welcome. I'm excited you're here. So the next question I have is, I do think that as we take back and take a look at what cooperatives are doing during Pride and credit unions, the reality is if you look around, I think 2022 did show that a lot more credit unions and cooperatives in general are doing a lot more during Pride. They're putting more things on their social media, they're doing more. But the question is, how do you feel that it was something that the needle is moving, or were we just putting in basically like an effort in quotes, or are we truly having some changes in our movement toward better understanding and welcoming the queer community in the cooperative space? What do you think, Tamila? Did you want to get us started on that?
Yeah, I think particularly in this area, and the spring and early summer months have a host of different celebrations and empowering underrepresented communities. And I believe particularly there was like a momentum to be more intentional started in 2020, and then there's start to be a feeling that perhaps a fatigue hit towards the end of 2021, and as we got into 2022, we started to see it waning. And so I actually was a bit overjoyed, to see so much energy, particularly with Pride, but I also want to know how that feels within a community. Like, does it feel that it is perhaps like just, is it an outlier? Like, is this year particularly celebratory and it may not be as celebratory next year, or is this like a good jumping off point for more energy? And definitely how that's felt and experienced throughout. So curious to feel how other people feel or are experiencing that.
What are your thoughts, Meeisha?
I definitely agree with that, especially in looking at it last year in 2021. I felt the same way. I felt like there were a lot more events and parades and protests and marches and just a different sense of community and camaraderie that I really felt radiated last year and definitely spilled over into 2022. I love to see that continuing to build as an outpour of some of the negative impacts that COVID did echo throughout the communities that like you mentioned, are underrepresented. So I'm glad to see that. And I hope that it continues to evolve and grow in 2023. In a separate conversation that I had on one of our CoOp Circle happy hours, one of the cooperative, I believe she was from a from a cooperative. She noted that there were some changes that she was seeing in her own community in North Carolina. And she noted that in previous years that there hadn't been a parade, there hadn't been festivals and things for some other celebratory events going on. But she was very, very excited to see that while it's a baby step in the right direction by way of celebrating these underrepresented communities, it was one that she recognized that had really changed in small towns in different parts of North Carolina that never imagined that would exist. So I'm glad to see it happening too, and just think that we are moving the ticker slowly forward. I do wish it was happening a little bit more expeditiously. Maybe that's the millennial Gen Z in me that's just like, okay, we can do this, let's go for it. But I am glad to see even some of the smaller communities in the South that are making that change.
Bringing up the South, I would like to invite our newest board member, Sandy Brown, to give your impression, your experiences, what you've experienced. And also, welcome to the board. We're so excited to have you join us.
Thank you. Thank y'all so much. I'm really happy to be here. I saw the email invite come through and I said, I have got to join this conversation because I just think that it is so important. And like what you mentioned, I am from a small, rural community in the South. And so I'll just be completely transparent in saying that sometimes these types of conversations can be a bit taboo. And so I'm, curious, I know Lindsay mentioned, kind of laying the groundwork at her co-op, but what that looks like. I mean, I know as co-ops, one of our values is solidarity. And I think that it is wonderfully shown through showing a commitment to underrepresented communities like what you all have been mentioning. But I'm curious in, how we can kind of build that collective support, even if, we may just have one or two people who are, willing to be those allies. How can we garner that support as an organization, even internally, before we're making a stand as a co-op and externally as well? I'm curious to know anyone's thoughts on that.
So one of the things I meant by laying the groundwork is that trying to be really conscious about what we're doing and who we're trying to lift up, and making sure that we're not doing it in a way that is not just disrespectful, but we don't want to monetize off of things. So we don't want to rainbow wash for Pride and just sell a bunch of rainbow products or slap on things. So it was really important for our group to start to, and I'm sorry, I have a bird in the background who has a lot to say at this moment. Trying to really make it just to spread education was one piece. We actually have a large LGBTQIA+ community in our stores, but they haven't always had the resources, and so, but even there, you can't gently just throw everything out and be like, hey, we're going to celebrate all of you. That would be probably a little off-putting as well. So just trying to bring more conversation around, show at the different days that happen throughout the month of June, that we're all part of Pride. So Loving Day, just a lot of different things. So that's what we mean by laying the groundwork, and just at least, and then really working towards pronouns and working on not misgendering people, and that. So just starting to really have those conversations and push them forward.
That's a great point, Solandy, because I mean, the reality is that, and that brings me to an interesting point and something that I've thought a lot about. I'm obviously most familiar with the credit union space because I've been in it for about 20 years, but I think it transcends and it goes into other cooperative sectors. But Bank of America formed their first LGBTQ plus employee resource group back in the 90s. And here we are 20 plus years later, and we're just getting to that. We're just beginning to have that conversation. In some ways, I feel like some of our sectors, I think some of our sectors have been a little bit more progressive, but I feel like for some reason, some of our sectors have been behind the ball. And have any of you thought about that and have any theories as to why that may be and how we might be able to try to move the needle within our movement and bring more awareness? And Andrew, I mean, I'd love to get your thoughts, because I know you've been in the credit union space for a while, and I think you could probably contribute to Salandi's question about how you have been successful at helping bring more understanding and awareness at the places you've worked at.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And, again, my experience has been in credit unions similar to yours, Juan. But I think a lot of cooperatives don't necessarily have the scale and size and resources we don't have the scale the Bank of America does, right? And so we had talked about this for several years, and I know I had it at multiple credit unions. And part of why we had never really done much is we didn't think we had the organizational time and resources to do this. And when we took a step back and said, as long as an organization we're supporting our employees, there is a grassroots enough effort of employees who are willing to just kind of put things together. And it became an opportunity to give our employees the platform to build the group on their own versus it needing to be a corporate project or anything like that. And it was really an epiphany for us a couple of years ago to realize that we didn't need to over engineer it, that if we created an environment where our team members felt safe enough and comfortable enough to know that they'd be supported, they would build it on their own. And they did. As I mentioned, we're a couple years in now. And one of the things I was so pleased to see, particularly this past year, is that we now, and this almost sounds counterintuitive, but I love it, we have more allies as a part of our Vantage West Pride group than we do people who might particularly identify in the LGBTQ area. And to me, that almost transcends the success of the group, to know that we have so many people who maybe have a family member who identifies as LGBTQ, or simply sees the importance and the value of supporting the group, that it's just a couple years in, taken a completely different turn. And I think it's just a much more genuine group of people now. And yeah, I think it's just for a lot of small organizations that think it's got to be over-engineered, it doesn't. Just to create that environment where the employees know they feel safe and welcome to do what they feel is important on their own, and they'll create it.
What Andrew talks about, we've also seen here at the NCBA CLUSA. So we have been, for the past year, running a DEI cohort in partnership with our Cooperative Development Foundation, activating a grant through Robert Wood Johnson, studying how cooperatives are uniquely positioned to, through the 7 cooperative principles and 6 cooperative values, expand DEI through our CoOp identity. And it's a cross-sector group of different co-op leaders, varying titles. So, everyone from like an administrative responsibility up through having organization general managers or CEOs from all different types of sizes, and independent of whether it's a co-op association, electric cooperative, credit union, housing cooperative, grocery cooperative, you name it, they were participating in it. That so much of the anxiety was like how to get started. So a lot of what Lindsay Andrew was saying, and the questions Alandi asked, like a lot of anxiety was there's so much interest in wanting to get started. Definitely, once you read the 7 cooperative principles, it's there in the words, but how to activate it intentionally without having rhetoric fueled, hollow activation. So much of it was the getting started of it. And an interesting thing happened. We're going to have the whole presentation at our Co-op Impact Conference, which is this October 5th and 6th in Washington, D.C. There also be virtual streaming for those seeking that. Is that they kind of went through the norming and storming on their own and then advanced into projects. So the group sent them to 4 groups to activate actual projects to advance DEI in the industry. And they did this cross-sector wise, and we're going to present on that. But The anxieties, are the same, in that wanting to get started, but not wanting to do so in a way that's not genuine or not effective. So much of it's getting started. Looks like Sydney, you want to contribute something?
Nope, sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Well, I love that, Andrew, and I think, Selendi, I think that's an interesting perspective, and that was one great thing that I saw with CU Shine, was that we created the framework, but then it took off by our members. They were the ones that organized the float. They were the ones that did all that, which was really, really exciting because they were really engaged. And as we look back on all these questions, I have one of my favorite people in the whole world who's on this call. I'm so happy to call him a mentor, and he's an amazing cooperator, former Credit Cooperative Hall of Fame inductee. Larry, you've been around the block for a couple of years in our cooperative movement, and I think you've seen a lot of change when it comes to attitudes and approaches when it comes to cooperatives and credit unions in the queer space. What would you like to share with us about what you've seen and what you've learned, and where you think we should go from here?
Well, thank you, Juan. I appreciate it. So I wasn't prepared to say anything, but now that you've asked me, I'm going to share a few things. So I joined CUNA Mutual. I've been with credit unions since I was 17 years old, and I'm a lot older than that now. But I joined CUNA Mutual in 1994, and CUNA Mutual flew me and my partner out. And they've been very supportive of me and my family the entire time of my career. There was an LGBT group at CUNA Mutual. It was sort of private and hidden, and you didn't really know about it. But I think that was the way it was all around the country. So it has evolved. I don't think you could find a more supportive group than CUNA Mutual Group for not only LGBT, but we have so many ERG resource groups that, I mean, it's really phenomenal. But one observation I will make growing up as a child of the 50s and 60s is that cooperatives all across the country, didn't matter what type of co-op you were, if you're a credit union, if you're a food co-op or a producer, whatever. A lot of our founders came from or lived in or were raised to think along a fairly conservative movement. So what I think you're seeing is a movement that is more accepting and more appreciative of the specialties of all of us. So it's been heartening to see that. This year, I live in a complex in Richmond, Virginia, but I also spend a lot of time in DC. In my apartment complex is 360 units, and a boatload of the neighbors got together and went to the Pride Festival an event in Richmond. And that was heartening. It was the gay folks as well as the allies. And there here in Washington, where I am, is only like a block and a half away from the Pride Festival. So I happened to be here coincidentally when they had that. And that was amazing to see the Secret Service with a booth recruiting LGBT people. So, I mean, the nation has really moved. This is only like 2 blocks away from where the FBI is headquartered. And in my growing up years, I had a friend that worked for the FBI and had the privilege of being personally fired by J. Edgar Hoover for being gay. So now to see them down there trying to recruit, I think it's very heartening.
That's wonderful, Larry. And I'll stay with you for this next question I have, because I'm curious to get your thoughts about it. I mean, I think it's great to see organizations, co-ops being more visible during Pride, but at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding. We need to see more people from diverse backgrounds, and in our case, people from our community, from the queer community, represented at C-suite positions and boards in our cooperative sector. Are you seeing that? Are you satisfied with what you're seeing in that space?
Satisfied. I'm pleased to see the progress, but that's the word, it's progress. And I think there's, we can be inclusive about LGBT, but there's so many more groups we need to be inclusive of. And so I think we have work to do. But we'll share one experience. I was with at a reception, or actually a dinner at a very conservative senator's house a few months ago. And there's only about maybe 8 or 10 of us there, and we were sitting chatting. It was supposed to be over in like 45 minutes to an hour. So we were in the second hour, and the senator was talking about his daughter and son being in athletics. And then they got into the whole thing about transgender and, what's permissible, what's not permissible. So everybody was chiming in. I thought, well, here I go. And so this is my first experience. So I'm sitting there with the senator, he's right beside me, and said, well, as probably the only gay person in the room, I'd like to share my thoughts. And I did. I felt so good about it. And I wasn't kicked out. I actually have stayed quite a bit longer. But progress is being made. Everybody accepted what I had to say. And that's good. I think we're all learning.
That is awesome, Larry. I always love getting your perspective after all of your years of commitment to our movement. So it's really refreshing to hear. I mean, I'll tell you that I think when it comes to having our community represented, I think we're making some great strides. I mean, and I think it all begins with awareness, having these conversations. But then we have to be intentional. But at the end of the day, we are having these conversations. I mean, I remember years ago going to many meetings and this was not raised. I think, Salanda, you used the word taboo. I mean, it was very much taboo. Not only did I not see many other queer folks, I also didn't see a lot of people of color. So at least now we're raising the awareness to it. Salandi.
Yes, I'd just like to add to that. I think that's so important because even when we as co-ops take a step back and just look at the climate of our nation right now, I feel like a lot of people are growing concerns for all underrepresented groups. And so I think conversations like this are so timely and really shows our commitment to concern for community in every single member of our community, no matter what your background is, no matter where you grew up. I think this is such an important conversation. And I'd like to just ask a question of, oftentimes when we see organizations, they'll step into this space for a moment, right? During, Pride Month or during, a specified day or holiday, but how can we, continue to make this an environment where we are supporting groups all throughout the year, that it doesn't just end, when the month is ending? Did you have any kind of thoughts on that?
I'll share a thought. So years ago, I took over a communications marketing position. And I noticed that all of our publications had white people were there, blonde, blue-eyed. And I thought, this is just wrong. We need to be more reflective. And I think we all are. But, one of the things when I walk into a place and I see an equal rights poster or a gay flag poster, I know that everyone is welcome. And I think that's something that we don't have to be out in a parade every day, but I think that people can show their support by subtle things like that. It says, hey, you're welcome here.
Thank you for that. And also thank you for so much that you're sharing, Larry. So good to hear, these stories from our leaders. In terms of being intentionally inclusive, a great way to do that in a genuine way that has a very, very strong impact is anytime you're putting out content, so whether that be a webinar or article we're writing, or anything in that space, is look at who you're selecting to be in that So for example, I had the great opportunity this year to present at the the Cooperators Communication Association annual conference about diversifying your sources. And the example I gave is that generally, when you're an underrepresented community, from the queer community, Black, AAPI, Latina, is that generally when you see stories that center specifically underrepresented group, it's always like the struggle, or it's always some like very inspirational story about overcoming something terrible or traumatic, or how, different ways that those communities are being oppressed. However, if it's an article about artificial intelligence in the cooperative group, it generally is a white heterosexual facing group that is interviewed or featured as being the expert. So wouldn't it be great that articles about artificial intelligence or a new innovation or about a startup or anything like that, and that includes a diverse and inclusive group of people, because again, you can't be what you can't see, but it's great to see yourself in a innovative story or a tech-centered story or a story about leaders, board directors, and it just so happens that everyone who was selected is an all-queer group of board directors of different sectors in the cooperative industry. So those type of choices show so much inclusivity, because that means that independent of the group, you're not only represented when there's a struggle or there's a traumatic story to tell, but also to uplift innovation and thought leadership and everything awesome that comes with all kinds of people in the cooperative industry.
I love that. I mentioned earlier the proof in the pudding, and what you just said, Tamila, made me think of attending a couple of years ago a sustainability summit that the United Nations Credit Union had put together. And for them, it was a journey, the whole sustainability conversation. And it wasn't just environmental, it was also when it came to corporate responsibility and responsibility with each other, et cetera, with all stakeholders. And one of the things that they mentioned was that they started out by creating a group that was volunteer-led to look at how they could become so to speak, greener. But from there, they started getting some goals on paper. They wanted to be carbon neutral, et cetera. But once they achieved that, they started thinking, well, what's our next step? And they started expecting that any companies that they dealt with were also showing them what they were doing around these issues, around environmental responsibility and so on. So it got me thinking, like, imagine if we did that as well. If we, whenever, all of us, all our co-ops have a lot of vendors that we do business with. Not only did we look at how we are becoming more intentionally more inclusive in hiring, but we started looking at I started asking the question about what are our vendors doing? How are we making sure that we, when we have a new building that we're constructing, for example, that we are trying to source builders from communities that are diverse, that we are looking to hire contractors that are of our communities, that we're actually investing money in the communities that we're trying to serve. Because I think, in my opinion, that is so powerful, that that is such a great way to not just pay lip service, but really put our dollars and uplift the communities that we're trying to help, and help those small business owners achieve success. Because let's face it, starting a business and carrying out a business is not always easy. So our cooperative movement can play such an important role in helping our communities succeed. Bonnie, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. And I just wanted to shine so much love on this conversation and convening this dialogue. And I was struck, to Tamila's point, I was struck the other week where our startup food co-ops were kind of shining light on the new member owners that, every new member owner that joins their food co-op, they were showing pictures of. And I was really emotional seeing a lot of queer couples being highlighted and then being struck, that could be my family, that could be highlighted. And why the frig is this so feeling like such a new thing that I'm seeing, right? And I just wrote immediately to that startup to be like, hey, thank you for showing couples, not individuals, you know, because we can't identify family structure through individuals necessarily, and how important that was. And I also just want to connect that to, you know, our food, we represent a federation of 40 food co-ops and startups, and our startups are pushing the movement. The startups that were organizing even 10 years ago in our region were, you know, co-ops come from unmet need, but the co-ops that are organizing now, every single one of them is driven by racial, social, and economic justice. And that comes through in their vision and their mission and their understanding. And so LGBTQIA rights, that's woven into what they talk about. It's what you're going to see on their website, on their Facebook. And I think they're pushing our movement of more established food co-ops to be like, this is how we show up. These are the stories that we highlight. And Tamila, thank you for saying, we cannot find freaking books about queer parents that it's so hard to find, that are not about a story of overcoming trials and tribulations. It's like, we do normal shit, show those stories, you know, just like normalize those stories. And I think the same thing for our food co-ops and for our cooperative community, to lift up stories of like in everything that we do, so that we see each other. And that for some people, to, you know, looking at the convergence of identities, are never going to feel safe. When are we, you know, there are certain people that are not going to feel safe. And so knowing that, even if they're not publicly out at work, if they're just being able to, for them to see these stories of people being, anything that our co-ops can do to throughout the year, to signal to, we are working as hard as possible to take away barriers to you feeling safe and included and welcome in this space. I think is needed, knowing that the reality is that right now in this country, it is not safe. It's not safe for a number of people carrying multiple identities. So that anything our food co-ops can do. And one last thought around politics, you know, when I joined the movement not too long ago, 15 or 20 years ago, there was we can't get involved in politics. And that now is a moment where we just need to obliterate that talking point. And what is politics? It's power, and it's who has access to life-saving things, right? And so thinking about this is a moment where all of our co-ops need to be standing up for and advocating for rights, human rights. And I'm seeing that more, and that's just something I want to lift up and applaud as a collective movement that we can continue doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. I see our fearless leader has his hand up.
Fearless, I'm not so sure. But Bonnie, well said on, I think, both or maybe all three of your points. I do want to thank Juan for moderating this, and Larry, it's so good to see you, Co-op Hall of Famer and a pillar, and very much part of this conversation. It's so wonderful to have this conversation, and Larry, you be with us. People, I don't know if people necessarily can appreciate, you know, what Larry's role over the years in this space. A very, very productive, very brave. So from Bonnie's really concrete point, I just want to take a moment to talk about the cooperative identity and LGBTQ plus community, and some of the things that NCBA CLUSA is up to. Just real briefly, many of you know that there's an ongoing conversation within the International Cooperative Alliance, but the global community, on our co-op identity, right? And probably we all know the 7 principles. Many of us know at least some of the values, and there's a question whether those principles and values that were agreed upon in 1995 is the last time they've been updated. Are they up to our community today, up to the world's reality and the challenges and the opportunities? Something that we've been bringing, that is NCBA CLUSA has been bringing to the conversation, is that diversity, equity, and inclusion should be better understood and more expressed within the cooperative identity. And by better understood, this is, we're not going to get into the weeds up, but there are things within the cooperative identity that already suggest, certainly an appreciation for diversity. One of the values is equity, in fact. But there's a real, I think, opportunity to have a conversation around, is it as inclusive, is the identity, the cooperative identity is as inclusive as it needs to be today? And we're having some of that conversation. We're bringing that. We brought it to Seoul, where Solandi was at the World Cooperative Congress. We were able to bring it to Sevilla just last week at another General Assembly, and that's going to go on for another 2 or 3 years. But whether that means an 8th cooperative principle, whether it means adjusting, 1 or 2 of the current principles, whether it means, re-emphasizing in different ways, we're not quite sure, because this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion across the world, we have our U.S. conception of it, but it is different in different cultures. So it's a delicate conversation, but I think the right one, and very much has to do with the community that we're talking about right now. The last thing that I'll mention just a little bit, and this isn't, this is maybe a little bit bragging on NCBA CLUSA, but I didn't have anything to do with it myself personally. It's the history of, in a quiet way, NCBA CLUSA, and Larry can speak to it with much more authority than me. It was a pretty darn inclusive place. We've had CEOs, we've had boards who were maybe majority old white farmers who chose to have a gay man as the CEO in the mid 80s or late 80s. And something like that occurred again. I can say that the workplace is that's one of the joys of working at NCBA CLUSA. It's kind of like, it hasn't been since I've been around. It's not even thought of, it's just part of the water. It's oxygen, which is pretty great. But the conversation today certainly reminds me that there's a lot more that we can do at NCBA CLUSA, but then certainly as a cooperative community. So thank you. And thanks everybody for taking the time to be part of this conversation today.
Thank you, Doug. And I think that's a great segue to our final question, because I think we have only time for one last question. And here we are almost at the end of Pride Month, when the rainbows come down, when the flags come down, when the products that companies are selling come down, what should happen? What are our next steps? What needs to happen between July and May? So this is not just a conversation that we have every June and put it away. Like what should we be doing over the next 11 months to not just pay lip service, but truly advance the interests of our communities, our queer community, not just within the cooperative space, but more broadly in our society? Because I do believe we have the not only the ability, but the responsibility to be leaders in this space. Who would like to take that first?
I can start, as we see our community thinking about it, and go put on my MBA hat, Harvard Business Review. And I believe this started about 10 or 15 years ago, a lot of writing about distinguishing between mentorship and sponsorship. Zalandi, I'm going to call on you, so get ready for that. How this is the setup. So the difference between mentorship and sponsorship is that one is passive in culture, the other is very action-filled in culture. So mentorship only requires advice. So if you are mentoring someone, you're only required to give them advice and make sure that they understand the foundation which they need to build, and recommended action steps for them to advance their goals. But mentorship is only, you're fulfilling your mentorship if you only have conversations and give advice. Sponsorship is very different. Sponsorship requires action. So to be someone's sponsor, you have to leverage your power and your access to their career for career benefit. So it could be as something that people don't think a lot about, like inviting them into a room that they're not invited into. So if you're a member of the board of director, if you're going to a political fundraiser, very special rooms that are like in-group rooms, inviting them in that space is an act of sponsorship. Promoting them inviting them to an opportunity is an act of sponsorship. If you know of a job opportunity and you are close with those who are decision makers, getting them in that conversation is an act of sponsorship. So sponsorship requires a type of action that leverages your power, your privilege, and your access. And generally, when people are sponsored, there are more actions that you see more results and impact to their career. So generally, underrepresented groups like the queer community, people of color, women in general, the queer communities especially, are over-mentored and under-sponsored. So looking at actions is to flip that and over-sponsor, and if anything, under-mentor, because we all can read. So let's be very action-oriented. And the first example that comes to mind is actually Sawandi. That's why I say I'm going to call on you, because like, for example, how you came to speak at the ICA conference in Seoul, and how I think we saw you in the Cooperative Leader Scholarship Institute in NCBApalooza last year. It seems like for me, for my experiencing it from my end, that like 2021 was like a glow up, professional glow up for you. But I'm curious of if I am right in hypothesizing that there was sponsorship behind the experiences and opportunities you had last year.
Absolutely. I think I cannot see it any better, Tamila, but that's so true. There is a distinct difference between mentorship and sponsorship, and I will, go ahead and give credit where credit is due to those people who did step up in that role for me in the past year, whether that's ICA or even with the emerging cooperators group with NCBA CLUSA, and with CoOp R8 consulting, sponsoring my first year of individual membership with NCBA. And so there has been people in groups who have taken that action step, just like what you said, which is so important, because we can say all day that we support a group, that's the words behind it, but when you're actually willing to make that investment, to help move people forward, not just giving them that encouragement, which is important, which is necessary to continue, but then taking that next step and say, this is how I'm going to support you in this endeavor, is I want to not only help either fund that, whether that's financially or just helping to fuel that action, I think is so important, and with any underrepresented group. And so, Juan, to your question, I think that investment can continue throughout the year, whether that's supporting businesses that are owned by LGBTQ members, or again, just making sure that everyone's feeling a part of the conversation, I think is important. Even to your point again, Tamila, about making sure your resources are diversified. I feel like this conversation has allowed me to take a more critical lens to the work that we're doing here, and then seeing the work that still needs to be done, whether that's again showing a photo of families. It's like, well, which families are we showing, and is it truly representative of the people that we're serving in the communities that are evolving? Even also, just as a side note, we sponsor and help sponsor something called a couples conference, where we're teaching couples about co-ops. And I just even looked at that application form and realized that the form is listed with husband and wife. And so even that in itself, it makes you start to think and wonder, how are we missing these groups? Are we truly being inclusive to everyone that we're serving? And so I think that that's something that is critical. And again, to kind of close on that sponsorship point, is I think when you are sponsored in that way, not only just encouraged, but when you have someone investing in you as the person being sponsored, you then start to think, how can I then sponsor someone else? Who else can I bring into the movement in this way? And I think when we think about sustainability of the cooperative movement, that's what it's going to take. Is that continuing, trend and pattern of sponsorship from one to another, and taking that first action step is the first way that we can do that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. That was wonderful. One of the things that I had written down for what I think we need to do, you hit right on the nail, which is, I had written it down as policies, but your example of the forms, I mean, what are your employment policies? What are you doing to make sure that once again, you're actually putting your diversity, equity, and inclusion into action in your organization. And I think policies is something that's often overlooked, but it's one of the simplest and first things you can do to create a more open and inclusive environment. Bonnie, did you want to contribute something to this question?
Sure. I think one of the things, it actually came from another NCBA CLUSA event, right? The Prelude to Pride webinar where I'm forgetting her. I think her name is Gabrielle Davis, NCG's Racial Equity and Food Justice Manager. She was talking about, if you don't have, how do dominant culture people go beyond performance? You bring in outside voices and you pay them to share, right? And so I think that's something for, if you find yourself in a place where there's only dominant culture people represented, then you learn, you be quiet and you listen and you learn and you compensate people for that. And so I think that's something that I was wanting to bring back to our Association of Food Co-ops, in addition to the things that Salandi was mentioning, about how do we take an internal look on all of our policy and procedures? Is our language welcoming? Do we have gender non-assumption policies? I love that one. Any of us who represent co-ops and customer service, we need to stop sirring and mamming, right? And that was kind of a relatively new lesson for me. So, thinking about how do we make sure to share those lessons among our members. But I think that bringing in outside voices and compensating them is one thing I wanted to shine up from a past conversation.
Thank you, Bonnie. Lindsay?
Yeah, I just want to exactly what Salandi was saying about forms, making sure they're more inclusive, as Bonnie was saying, like making sure that they cover genders. One thing we were talking about, we've been looking at our compensation packages and trying to and looking at how those are equity for male, female, across different underrepresented groups, racially, all, gendered. And of course, when we're only tracking 2 genders, like that's hard. And one thing that came up too is like we have an employee whose email is in their dead name. And the last HR, there wasn't a way to like change that. I mean, it seems like something so simple, like this is their dead name.
Lindsay, would you mind sharing what a dead name is?
They're transgender, so their dead name was the name that was given to them at birth, but it's not their chosen name and in their chosen gender. So, and it's not who they identify as, but like changing that is, for some reason, is just like, it's like stuck in the works. And so really finding ways to just making sure that we are creating spaces. And I think I want to also go back to one other thing that Bonnie was bringing up is being active civically. If the past week to plus, are any indication of just things are not good out there and are going to continue to roll back for all underrepresented groups, and it's going to hit different groups more at different times. So recognizing that fatigue, the emotional overwhelm, and creating space for that, which doesn't necessarily go naturally in like corporate churning, like we've got to be at work 9 to 5 or whatever, whatever your shifts are, and we have to do like, and realizing that like that there's a lot of and figuring out a new way to approach that, I think is really important. Because like, I know on Monday I was like, wait, we're supposed to go back to work? Like, what? After spending a whole weekend walking around shell-shocked, and just like, oh, and the world's gonna move on. Like, so finding ways to at least address them internally, I think, is ways that we can continue this work for all sorts of different groups.
Thank you, Lindsay. This has been such a powerful conversation, and I hope everyone's been very invigorated. I know the times are tough, and at the end of the day, we need to be there for each other, because when one of us falls, we all fall, and we're cooperatives. That's what the cooperative movement is all about. It's about lifting each other up. My takeaways for what we should do going forward I tried to write down some of the things that many of you said, but partnerships. Right now, we've been marching in pride parades. Let's form true partnerships with the groups in our communities that need us, and not just in the queer community, but other historically marginalized communities. Policies, making sure that they are diverse and inclusive. And the other thing is lifting up those that work in our co-ops and being intentional about that, identifying folks that we want, that are our future, and investing in them. And last but not least, and this is something that's near and dear to my heart, but making sure that we are investing our co-ops dollars in a way that are investing in communities that are historically marginalized, that need those dollars. And that's what I think, in my opinion, what the cooperative movement is all about. So that is all I have. I'd love to turn it back over to Tamila for any closing comments you may have.
I just want to thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Juan, for being our moderator and helping us close out on the 2022 Pride Month in such an awesome way. Thank you for Larry Blanchard, Bonnie, Andrew, and all those who joined us today. We love and appreciate it. Continue to look out as we are giving more opportunities to continue this conversation through CoOp Circle and our CoOp Circle Happy Hour. We'd love to see you on there joining and giving more. So we want to pass the mic continuously to our members, and thank you so much for sharing what you had to say to us. So thank you for joining us today, and you all have a wonderful week as best you can, and continue to take care of yourselves and each other.
Thank you, everybody. Good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Juan.
Thank you.